about 10 years too late. So, first of all, welcome to GB News on Tour. Lovely to be here with you all. So, I'm Rebecca. I am actually Chief Executive of a mental health organisation. Sat there like, who's he talking about? I did find a private investigation company 15 years ago, but since then I have moved on quite a bit. So I'm also Chief Executive of a children's charity, and I'm a trainee solicitor as well. So let me start by telling you, first and foremost, I do people. I'm not very good with all of this politics, corporate stuff. So everything that Lembit has just said there, wholeheartedly agree with a lot. Well done. But now I want to cover what I think that we need to do to enforce that, because I deal with people and mindsets and psychology. And I do that from the inside and about who I am and where I've come from. So I'm pushing into my 40s, and I have been brought up by the best generations. So my parents are in the mid-70s, my grandparents are now past, but they were in the mid-90s until not long ago. And if there's one thing that I'm sick of them telling me, it's that they're afraid to speak, and that they don't know if what they're saying is right or if somebody's going to tell them if they're wrong. And it seems to me like we've lost the art form of conversation, because it's all about who speaks and shouts the loudest now. So their generational tactics for me, and the qualities that we are losing today, is their hard-working, humble nature. They got their heads down and they listened to others. And unfortunately, my generation, I think, is probably the last generation, and we are losing all of those qualities. And if we don't do something about it, we won't have them anymore. So I echo also a lot of what Sophie said. So their voices, I think, need to stay with us and they need to be heard. But why do I think that we need to do that? Well, did you know that I identified as flamingo? I'm a flamingo. Did you know that? No? Okay, but I am. Do you think that I'm not? Okay. Do you think it's questionable? No, I am a flamingo. I was born a flamingo, and you must believe me, which is essentially what is happening today with a brand of people who are going around trying to tell us that they were born female when they were actually born male, and if we choose to doubt them, then we're in the wrong. So I don't know if you've ever heard a term of gaslighting, but I'll give you the definition. The definition of gaslighting is manipulating somebody into doubting their own sanity. So when you have somebody in front of you who's trying to tell you that they were female or male and they were born that way, I'm not going to believe them, and I'm not going to sign up to ideologically. Ideologically, that's not a word. You get where I mean. So my point here is that I'm not going to, I have no problems with whatever gender anybody wants to identify as, and I've got no problems if anybody wants to identify as a flamingo, but what I will not do is absolutely wholeheartedly believe that that's what they were born as. I'm going to call it the truth, and I won't have them into manipulating me into believing something else, and that's okay. And that's the bits where my parents are like, I don't know what to say and I don't know what to do. It's alright, just say the truth. And that's the bit that really winds me up today, is that we are now getting into a world where it's not about who's right, it's about who creates the biggest shitstorm. We've lost the art of conversation. We're not allowed to say, no, actually, I don't think that that's quite the case. What we have to do is believe everything that everybody says and pretend like it's the truth when it's not. So we've got idiots throwing milk in Harrods. And but the irony of this bit is that who actually knows why they were throwing the milk? Because I don't get it. We've got morons of the year 2021, also known as Insulate Britain, still sat in the roads today trying to tell us that we've got a climate change emergency. Well, for me, they've lost the point, because they're penalising the wrong people. The people chucking the milk around in Harrods, I don't even know what your point is, but what I do know is that now Harrods are going to have to go and buy more milk to replace, and you look like the idiot. I know that the people sat in the middle of the roads are actually penalising the wrong people, They're penalising the hard-working person who is just trying to go to work. They're penalising the mother who's trying to get to hospital and she's driving an electric goddamn car. It does not make sense. And we're supposed to sit back and accept and say that it's okay, and we're not allowed to challenge the behaviours. And that's the bit for me where it has to stop. And the reason why it has to stop, and the reason why they lose their point for me, is that because we just don't negotiate with terrorists. But unfortunately, I think our government is trying to. I do think, though, that there is an element of hope, and I do think that what Sophie says, it does lie with us, and that we have to start challenging and changing the beliefs of the people that are around us today. And I do think that the tables can turn, and a really good example of this is I went to Edinburgh last year with my 9-year-old daughter, who was the most excitable little thing in the whole entire world, because we were going to see J.K. Rowling's statue. And when we got there, and she's all excited, it's closed off. And it was closed off because J.K. Rowling had spoke out against the Mermaids charity and about their gender ideal, that word again that I can't say.
Ideology.
Thank you! Look, somebody's desperate to correct me. So she spoke out against that, and then her statue was defaced. It was blasted with paint until the authorities actually cordoned it off. And everybody turned against her, and the tides really did turn, and then people were like, oh, we don't talk about Harry Potter anymore. But now today, it's different, because she has been vindicated, and she has been proven right. The charity is actually now closed down, and everybody's like, oh yeah, J.K. Rowling was right all along. Well, you weren't saying that when a statue was closed up and my 9-year-old were crying because she couldn't see it. For me, I think that the important thing, and I think that this is the bit where even I find it difficult, we all sit on GB News quite a lot of the time, and we are challenged, and we are told that we're wrong. We get trolls on Twitter constantly, and I think that the only thing that we can all do is to hold our nerve and truly passionately believe that we are right, because J.K. Rowling didn't back down. She was right, and in the end the tables did turn. And I really do think that the tables will turn eventually when more people start to see that we were right. Happened with COVID as well, but you know, I won't go into that one. So for me, I say I do people, and I say that I'm not going to keep quiet. I'm not the type of person to keep quiet. In fact, I'm always getting in trouble. Ever since I was a kid, actually, I've always got in trouble for speaking my mind. But I go from that human place, and I go from my own personal reasons, and I want to tell you a very personal story about why I'm never going to keep quiet, and why I'm going to keep on speaking up against all of these things that are happening with my generation and generations that are coming through, and why I think that we need to stop, and why we have to do something and listen to what we're actually saying here today. My nana, absolute legend. She had dementia and Alzheimer's, and for the last 5 years of her life I was classed as being her main carer, which meant that somewhere, at some point in time, I was always kicking up a fuss about something to do with Nana. Whether it was a care agency, or whether it was with social services or with the council, I was always kicking off with somebody somewhere to try and get her the best possible care that she could, because life constantly changed. But in May this year she broke her hip and ended up in hospital. And I knew that something was wrong. Inside of me, I just knew that something else was wrong. And doctors kept on talking to me about this hip. And one day my mum went to visit her, and she rang me up, and she's screaming down the phone. She's like, your grandma's dying. I'm like, what? Well, by this point, I'd been stopped from seeing my grandma for 2 weeks because of COVID and because of restrictions on visiting. And, well, you know, 2 random people have already seen her today, Rebecca, so you can't do, was what the nurse said to me when I rang up and said, my mum's rang me up and told me my grandma's dying. And she's like, well, you can't come until tomorrow. I went, is she going to make it that far? She went, yeah, she's fine. And I just thought, stop kicking up a fuss, Rebecca, as per usual. My mum had done the same. My mum didn't feel like she could speak anymore. She felt like she had to be silent too, because we were always met back with this resistance of it was us that were wrong. Then a week later, I insisted on seeing a doctor, because by this point I'd still not seen her because of COVID restrictions, and by this point I'm in June, which, you know, a long time after COVID if you ask me. So I sat in front of a doctor. He's telling me about my grandma's hip, and I said to him, will you stop telling me about her hip? something is wrong with her, seriously wrong with her. She keeps being sick, she keeps doing this, she keeps doing that. And he said, oh, okay. And I went, no, seriously. And he wasn't listening to me. And if there's one day I could go back to, it'd be that day, and I'd kick up even more of a fuss. Because a week later, we got a call from the hospital, and my grandma had been vomiting blood for 17 hours. And the hospital didn't ring and they didn't tell us. And so then all night my mum was in the hospital. The call came in at 10 o'clock at night. I'd already gone to sleep. Miraculously got an early night. It was wonderful. But then I woke up in the morning. My mum said, Grandma's been vomiting blood all night long. You need to get to the hospital. I rang up the hospital. The doctor said to me, oh, don't worry. The vomiting stopped. She's all right. She's having an endoscopy. Come after your meeting, Rebecca. Don't worry. I was like, are you sure? And he went, yeah, okay. And I thought, do you know what? I won't kick up a fuss. I went to my meeting. And then 4 hours later, I went back to the hospital with my mum, and Grandma was sat there in a pool of blood. It hadn't stopped at all. We put our trust and faith in the doctors, and it was absolute nonsense. 2 hours after that, my grandma died. She'd been left to bleed to death for 37 hours. And, well, ironically, this time last week, I was sat in the first of her inquests, because it now looks like the state has killed my grandma through neglect. And yeah, just a bit. But I knew I was right. I knew at all those points in times when me and my mum kept on saying to each other, we have to stop kicking up a fuss. We have to trust them. We have to believe them. I'm never going to trust or believe anybody ever again in my whole entire life, because I did that and my grandma died. So when people are telling me climate change is a problem, I'm sorry, but I don't believe it. I want the facts. I want the evidence. I don't have to sit back, because I don't have to be gaslit by a man who wants to identify as a fish. I'm not going to believe you. You weren't born a fish, and I couldn't care less. I'm not going to believe it when they tell me that climate change is a problem. I am going to question everything, and more importantly than that, I'm going to speak up about it, because if I don't, I never want to be in the position that I am now in, where I should have done more. There's one thing that we always thought with my grandma and her 5 years of dementia and Alzheimer's and everything we did for her, we never thought we would get to her death and think we should have done more. We should have had more arguments. We should have done this and that, and never thought we'd get there. And now today we are left with questions. We still have time now, because we can still constantly challenge these stupid ideas and these stupid theories that we see coming through, and we can say stop, have a conversation about it, because we have time. And I'm always going to use my voice, because my nana taught me to do that. She was more fiery than I've ever been in my whole entire life. For me, woke behaviour is silencing the qualities of those generations that I don't ever want to lose. And I think that if we don't speak up now, it will be gone forever. Thank you.